You said that you felt like your life was over when you were arrested and when you were sentenced. Talk about your experience in prison, and then obviously you've turned your life around. When did that occur?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked that question a lot, and I think partially because usually people are kind of thinking about what is that kind of come to Jesus moment, or that you hit rock bottom. And for me, it wasn't that. It was more of this kind of these touch points along the way, just different things that happened. And one that I point back to is I had incredible mentors. And these weren't mentors in the traditional sense. These were men who were serving life in prison who saw something redeemable in me that I didn't see in myself. And, in their quest to help me, stay out of trouble, they guided me to books. And I was fortunate, I was literate. People talk about hitting the genetic lotto, or, what area code you're born into or what family you're born into. For me, my version of that was being lucky enough to be literate in an environment where the average reading grade level was third grade. And so those books that they guided me to really just kind of, exploded these ideas that I had about myself. The insecurity, the self-loathing, the, not feeling worthy of anything beyond what my circumstances were. And those books challenged me to awaken my mind to different ideas, but it didn't happen overnight. It was a process. And so, I was getting in a lot of trouble in prison, and I ended up doing a total of 7 years in solitary confinement. The longest stretch was 4.5 years, from 1999 to like 2004, and or 2005, one of them. But that time period, all the things kind of culminated into these defining moments for me, where I began to ask myself these tough questions. How did I, a kid with dreams of being a doctor and an artist, end up serving out my most promising years in solitary confinement? And that questioning came from me reading. I was reading, Plato's Republic, and came across the Apology, and the unexamined life, that line, the unexamined life isn't worth living. Like that challenged me to like figure my life out, and so I started journaling. And through the journaling process, what I landed on was that if I'm ever going to turn my life around, I have to make a commitment by proving it to myself. And what that looked like to me was I challenged myself to write a book in 30 days. And I said to myself, if you don't write that book in 30 days, you're going to die in here. And it was an ultimatum. It was the biggest ultimatum that I've ever made in my life. And, I wrote that book in 30 days, and that began the arduous journey toward reimagining a life for myself inside prison, but also outside of prison. When I first sat down to write, I didn't know what was going to happen. And there was something about not knowing what was going to happen that actually made it very exciting to me to try it. I mean, because I didn't have any formal training in how to write a book. I hadn't taken any writing classes up to that point. I had read a lot, and I knew the books that spoke to me, and the rhythm and the structures. And so I really organically just taught myself, but I also gave myself a ton of permission to not make it perfect. And interestingly enough, I have my original writings. Like, I have all of my original writings, which I'm really super proud of. These first books that I wrote by hand in solitary confinement, I still have all those notepads, and there's not a lot of mistakes on the notepads. So I really got into like a flow, and I just gave myself permission to get lost in the story, because completing it was more important than perfecting it. And I think, if people even just take that away as a metaphor for life, sometimes we get so caught up in trying to perfect the thing that we never finish it. And so for me, it was like, if I finish it, I can always go back and perfect it. And, that's how I write to this day. I just write based on a feeling, and then it's kind of the refinement of the craft. When I'm actually committing it to now a laptop versus handwritten, even though I handwrite in my journals.
There's a there's an author named Safi Bakal. He's been on this show. He wrote a book called Loon Shots. It's about innovation
Yeah.
and audacious ideas. And he has this process called FBR
Mm,
that I try to incorporate in my companies and I try to teach my daughters. FBR stands for fast, bad, and wrong.
mm,
And he says, just write it down.
yeah.
Fast, bad, wrong. It doesn't have to be accurate. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just put it out there.
Yeah.
And then the writing is really the refinement of it. But you can get a lot done if you go the FBR process. Now, stuff that is going to be, when you hit publish, FBR doesn't work. And
Right.
when it's
Right.
client facing, it doesn't work. But to get it out there, FBR is a pretty good process.
Yeah, whenever I'm coaching people on writing and telling their story, I tell them you just have to start with the highest disregard for any structure, any formality, and really just get to the story. And so, one of the things I had them do is just get themselves permission to write the worst thing ever. And once you get that out of the way, you can just focus on just tell the story you want to tell, and then the craft itself. Because there's like writing, and then there's the craft of like really understanding the structure and grammar and punctuation and all those things, which I don't I think I just learned so much of that intuitively from reading, but that comes later.